There is a party directive dealing with the control of the past. Repeat it to me. Repeat it to me. Repeat it to me. Repeat it to me.
Who controls the past, controls the past, controls the future, controls the future, controls the present, controls the present, controls the past, controls the past.
And where do you suppose this past exists?
Records.
The party controls all records. Party controls all records. Controls all records. Controls all records.
And human memories, human memories.
Party controls all human memories. All human memories. All human memories.
It's why I believe that we ought to focus on our homeland threats, the chemical, biological, nuclear weaponry, the kind of suicide actions that we saw.
You base that?
I'm really on kind of thin ice here, and I'm concerned about making sure that I don't say anything that leads someone as bright as you to ask me the next question and put me in the spot of potentially revealing things I shouldn't reveal.
Well, in fairness, Senator, we're all on thin ice around here.
But a nuclear bomb. Now, it wasn't a nuclear bomb. It was a 350-ton conventional bomb in the World Trade Center.
Today, I am discussing the Ground Zero model. This is a physical model that should be investigated by the universities, but at the university level, it's either avoided or outlawed. I've given this lecture 5 or 6 times now, and I noticed that there are 2 major barriers to understanding for the audience. The first barrier consists of the physical arguments. The second barrier is the difficulty in classifying the information regarding the perpetrators. Yet the problem is easy to solve if we keep enough distance from it and look at it from afar. And that is also the model for this lecture. On the right scale, everything becomes simple. On the right scale, we can see the major connections that go as far as nuclear blackmail against the civil society. I will start with September 10th, 2001 and the following message. Please play the first video.
According to some estimates, we can now track $2.3 trillion in transactions.
In German, these trillions translate to the words 2.3 billion. And for you in Switzerland, this sum is very easy to remember. There are about 2.3 million families in Switzerland. This means that every single family in Switzerland would each receive $1 million if this deficit were distributed among the citizens. For every American family, there would only be a sum of $25,000, but you would notice that in your household budget too. So it really is a lot of money. And to investigate where this money was, a civilian investigation commission was set up at the Pentagon. On September 11th, however, several explosive devices detonated in the office of the civil investigators in the Pentagon, destroying the data and killing the investigators. But there was backup data. This data was located in New York in an almost 200-meter high office tower, which has gone down in history under the name Building 7. So now we go to New York. This Building 7 was also destroyed on September 11th. It collapsed at 5:20 p.m. in freefall. 2 large steel towers, each 400 meters high, were also destroyed. In addition, cars and other steel buildings ignited adjacent to the World Trade Center, and some burned out completely, as indicated here below in the drawing. Here you can see the rubble heap of Building 7, with the untraceable backup data of the $2.3 trillion. And it stands out that this smoking pile of rubble is amazingly small. We talk about a building standing 200 meters tall just 7 seconds before the existence of the rubble heap. Here's another shot. They actually threw earth on this heap of rubble. At first sight, this is completely incomprehensible, but it is a standard measure for decontamination. Ladies and gentlemen, in the truth movement, it's always said that the only possibility of allowing Building 7 to collapse in freefall is the simultaneous cutting of all 81 vertical steel columns which supported the building. That is physically not quite correct. There is actually a second possibility. This would be to equally and evenly weaken the steel columns over a several-hour period. Extreme rust would be an example. Then, a very small detonation will be sufficient to destabilize the entire structure, like giving it a small punch, as all the steel columns will give way during their 200-meter downfall, since no single column is able to transfer the forces anymore as a result of the rust. Through the free fall, the weakened material gains enough kinetic energy that it's compressed by its own weight, so pressing itself together during impact on the ground. And the result is this miserably small smoking pile of rust, which you can see here in this picture. You've already noticed that the Ground Zero model postulates a nuclear destruction of the World Trade Center. Within the framework of a model, we can claim everything. For playing with the model, it only has to be conclusive in itself. For this, we use a trick. We look at the processes on a kilometer scale and put the model into a cube with an edge length of 1 kilometer. In this way, we avoid the usual problem of asking questions about, for example, the single connecting bolts, which fall on the meter or centimeter scale. These do not interest us, as they would only complicate things. In this model, the small connecting bolts simply evaporate. With this, we immediately generate a rejection reaction of the trained mind. And by trained mind, I mean the mind trained and influenced by the mass media. If you try to communicate this model, you immediately provoke two sorts of reactions. No, because Americans would never do that to Americans, and no, because it would all have been radioactive. If you then start to argue, this always only leads to the typical escape reaction of the trained mind and the statement, "Leave me alone, give me a break." With this defensive attitude, you can only play to a very limited extent, yet a surprisingly playful counter-question is still possible. No, the psychopaths of power would never do that to the Americans, and no, radioactivity cannot hide. This produces less rejection, but is still an escape reaction. They say, hopefully he isn't right. I don't want to know. To overcome this barrier, I had originally designed a kind of game board for this lecture, based on the well-known game Parcheesi. The conservation laws of physics would have served as a game piece, namely the three conservation laws, linear momentum, mass preservation, and energy, as well as the radiation component subordinate to these laws. Then we would have gone through 4 game stations: observation, sketch, calculation model, and prognosis, and again, observation, sketch, calculation model, and prognosis. And with each piece, we would have made at least one round and tried to reach the safe home port. My wife then suddenly said that this was boring. I would once again be very clever and pedantic with physical arguments. So this is why I've changed the concept. I try to approach the problem from above, from a bird's eye view, not from below, using physical arguments, but from above. And so I simply ask, who could have planned something like this, and what is a possible group of perpetrators? And I think it's legitimate to call the perpetrator group psychopaths of power. For these psychopaths of power, dominance and hierarchy are more important than resonance and harmony. They are no more intelligent than we are, of course, but they do think differently. They think more roughly and more coarsely. They think in very simple structures. They do consider themselves ingenious and unassailable, and they do write history themselves and form society according to their own image. In short, they think on the scale of megalomaniacs. This is not an attribution of blame, but the works of certain groups must still be examined very carefully for historiography. One representative of this group, for example, is Philip David Zelikow. He himself boasts of being what in German is called a lying Baron Munchausen, boasting about the ability to create and to maintain a public myth and to maintain it for a long time. Yes, that's indeed a quote, the ability to create and to maintain a public myth. In 1998, for example, Zelikow developed a strategy paper showing how the United States of America could be transformed into a police state. In this blueprint, Zelikow uses a trick. He describes the past, but projects it into the future. In 1998, he describes the small bomb attack at the World Trade Center, which occurred earlier in 1993. But at the same time, he correctly predicts the later and much larger events of 2001. The paper says, and I quote the first and the last paragraph here, "If the device that exploded in 1993 under the World Trade Center had been nuclear, or had effectively dispersed a deadly pathogen then the United States might have responded with draconian measures, scaling back civil liberties, allowing wider surveillance of citizens, detention of suspects, and the use of deadly force." Now let's just assume that Philip Zelikow has given us and his colleagues the full truth. Then the deadly pathogens were the anthrax spores seen below, sent by mail in September 2001. However, in the meantime, it has turned out that these spores came from a U.S. weapons laboratory because of their fine coating and can therefore be attributed to the U.S. manufacturer by name. But today, we're interested in nuclear prediction, and indeed there are recordings that speak a clear language. To the following video, I have to say briefly, First, the recordings are exclusively from Building 7. Second, the recordings are not played in time-lapse. That means the events happen as fast as shown. Only the time window is cut from 3 minutes to 1 minute and thus compressed. Now I need the next video, please. The video shows at the beginning the free fall of Building 7. Here it comes down like a falling stone. Then a pyroclastic cloud develops a pyroclastic dust flow. Recorded from another perspective from a balcony, we see the same situation continue. You can see the spread of the dust clouds, and then we cut in time. After about 1 minute, the dust at the base becomes milky, and the strong swelling mushroom cloud develops out of the remains of Building 7. Here it starts to develop. This is a recording across from the Hudson River. It's very nice to see the 4 side branches next to the central cloud, which rises to about 1,300 meters in 1 minute. You also notice the nub and the vortex funnel, which are very typical phenomena for a nuclear explosion. Now, of course, we're interested in how you can detonate a nuclear weapon in a major city without the citizens immediately realizing it. We are making a detailed discussion for this. The transcript of a 1970 symposium on engineering with nuclear explosives, a similar topic, provides some indications. Specifically, it deals with nuclear landscaping. On the basis of these documents, we can formulate a hypothesis that is the following assumption. The destruction of the World Trade Center was already planned before its construction. Now you may ask, why was there a symposium in 1970 on the topic, in which, by the way, about 500 of the world's best scientists took part? For this, we need to understand 2 things. First, the euphoria that prevailed in 1965 over nuclear landscaping, and secondly, the assessment of the techniques developed around 1965 that made nuclear landscaping seem feasible. This graph shows, for example, the planning of a railway line through a mountain. This means not, as is usual in Switzerland, with the help of a tunnel, but by removing the entire mountain. For this purpose, 23 atomic bombs would have been detonated, which would have opened the mountain over a width of 500 meters. As part of the U.S. Carryall project, the mountain ridge would have therefore disappeared on a length of 4.5 kilometers. The explosive power of the atomic bomb would have been between 20 kilotons and 200 kilotons. For comparison, the direct energy released of the Hiroshima bomb was only 15 kilotons. You thus notice high energies are needed for landscaping. Here in the picture you see the mountain ridge. The charges with 200 kilotons would have been placed in the center under the mountain, the red dots, and the green dots show the place of the smaller charges, about 20 kilotons at the edge of the mountain. Here on the left in the picture, the black and white image, a model of the never realized project with an additional water collecting basin, slightly colored in orange, which would have been produced by an energy input of 100 kilotons. But to make you feel the unimaginable scale, you remember the motto of this lecture: on the right scale, everything becomes simple. I have shown you the 6.5 kilometer long Fander tunnel near Bregenz, Austria, on the right, a tunnel many of you may be familiar with. The idea of dividing the Fander into 2 parts, Fander East and Fander West, and leaving the Autobahn above ground is simply grotesque for all of us. But I want to give you the feeling for the right scale. The blasting reference to the Carryall water basin is the crater of Storax Sedan, which was also realized with about 100 kilotons in 1962. Now these are now real images. The depth of the crater is about 100 meters, diameter is 400 meters, and the explosion caused a strong earthquake of 4.75 on the Richter scale. Interesting are the different expert opinions regarding the possible start of construction work after a nuclear blast. Some experts assume that the work could have started after only 3 days with little protection for the workers. Other sources give a recommended waiting period of 1 year for the Carryall project. Only then radioactivity levels were considered to be sufficiently low. But the most important goal of the symposium was to advance nuclear landscaping by reducing radioactive contamination. A number of tricks were developed, including the combination of nuclear and conventional explosive devices. It has been found that by superimposing shock waves, small conventional charges can have an extreme effect, as you can see in the drawing. For this purpose, these conventional charges are ignited approximately 200 milliseconds after the bomb has been detonated. So, due to the superposition, you have an extreme effect. So here you see the atomic bomb at the bottom, small charges at the top. This shaft was called the nuclear chimney already in 1970. You can also remove a mountain horizontally, or blow up a mine shaft. Another method to increase the explosive effect, but to minimize the radioactive contamination, was the use of water as an additional propellant. When the atomic bomb is detonated in a water basin, which is again fully surrounded by granite, the water unfolds an incredible destructive force vertically upwards during the pressure discharge. In this configuration, a water basin of 340 cubic meters is recommended for a 20 kiloton charge. This corresponds to a cube of only 7 meters edge length, which is the size of a small house, which would contain the water volume. To help you to understand the real enthusiasm of our nuclear colleagues in 1970s landscaping, here is some additional information. There are elements such as iron like the World Trade Center, but also silicon and oxygen, silicon dioxide is sand, that can form 3 or 4 non-radioactive isotopes. This means that iron or granite does not immediately become radioactive, even if the element absorbs neutrons from the explosion of an atomic bomb. Or, as is the case for oxygen, the resulting radioactive isotope disintegrates within seconds and is therefore not a long-term problem. All these factors, all these 4 points listed here, spoke in favor of using the atomic bomb for landscaping when ignited in granite. Of course, calculations were also presented at the symposium. It was necessary to understand where the material would go after the atomic bomb was detonated. To put it casually, in a nutshell, you have to know how the mountain accelerates, how it rotates, what stresses are to be expected in the rock, and so on. In a very simplified way, this can be represented by tensors. By this, we end the detailed description of nuclear landscaping, and we apply that knowledge to the problem of September 11th. How does the atomic bomb work? Here you can see the first layout. In this case, we've placed a relatively small 20 kiloton bomb above the water booster. An open channel connects the nuclear bomb with the tower. After detonation, the channel leads the gamma flash into the tower, which is already connected to a nuclear chimney, and will be torn apart by the following eruption of the water booster. Wait just a second. Alright. Please note, the pressure wave is fully compressed in the ground, which means you won't get this big crater. But like inside a rifle's explosion chamber, the pressure wave remains fully enclosed, and you get just a shot vertically upwards out of the ground. And that's what we're observing. We see a clear eruption behavior of the North Tower. In the middle, the central black cloud of condensed iron vapor is visible, while the white eruption-like fountain is caused by the pressure discharge of the water and the evaporated rock. Here you can see the validity of a main principle of physics, the conservation of momentum. A vertical upward movement remains vertical as long as it is not deflected by an obstacle. The top of the tower was just such an obstacle. Further, we see or hear the validity of another principle, preservation of mass or volume flow. In the next video, the acoustic information is important. Don't pay attention to the pictures. First, you see the focused eruption of a gas stream from the volcano Stromboli. Then simply compare the noise between the videos. Now please watch the video. So we can see from this simple example, acoustically, the roar of the North Tower is indistinguishable from a focused eruption. Thus, another law of physics supports the ground zero model. The cause and sources of the volume flow is explained. So the air masses do not come out of nowhere. On the other hand, radioactivity must have been released in a measurable amount because the vaporized bomb enters the environment with the eruption gases. In fact, the radioactivity can be calculated, meaning that according to the ground zero model, expected radioactivity can be calculated as soon as we know the level of energy input. Here the uranium fission is shown. During fission, uranium splits into 2 parts and forms 2 differently sized fragments. These fragments vary in size and radioactivity. The graph shows the probability of these fragments forming. The task now is to detect the long-lived isotopes from this nuclear fission. With many months' delay, a first analysis of the dust took place from the World Trade Center. There was only a slight increase in beta activity. This is even officially admitted. However, it was classified as far too low for a nuclear process. At least it was interpreted that way. and that's the reason for not further examining the cause of this increase. The analysis was performed by Dr. Paul Loy on the basis of liquid scintillation counting. Additives in a liquid emit a flash of light as soon as these additives are excited by radioactivity. This flash interference effect can also be detected with high-resolution cameras. Now, we should not expect any loss of camera pixels with a non-radioactive dust. That's logical. Strangely enough, several cameras at 9/11 show exactly this effect, a loss of pixels. Each camera's image is built line by line from left to right. A hit pixel, or the line, recovers within milliseconds and causes the impression of a horizontally scurrying silverfish, kind of a flash of light. Now please watch the current video. Here comes the cloud. The journalists flee and are captured by the cloud soon after. And as soon as they are captured by the cloud, you see the phenomenon. Here you see the white silverfish, an indication of a nuclear detonation. All right, so you see massive interference in the electronics. Who's right now? An American colleague wanted to know exactly, and he bought a piece of the World Trade Center on eBay. Similar to the remains of the Berlin Wall, the World Trade Center can also be bought piece by piece. And for $355, the pieces ended up on a friend's kitchen table. Here you can see the baked together steel, concrete, and stone lumps. It should come as no surprise that no signal can be detected here, as the alpha and beta radiation is masked by the iron. It's different with gamma radiation. This radiation penetrates solid substances with relatively high energy. When passing through solids, only the intensity of the beam decreases. Its wavelength or energy line is not changed. The same is true for laser light. When passing through glass, the laser beam does not change its color, only its intensity or its strength. And so a part of the sample has embarked on a wondrous journey from the kitchen table into a gamma spectrometer at a German university. Some of the uranium fission products can be detected in this gamma spectrometer. Particularly easy to detect is the isotope cesium-137. It reveals itself by an energy line at 662 keV. And to my great surprise, even this energy line was not present. I have drawn these in yellow here. You see it here in the first third, a yellow stroke. That's where the line should be, but it's hiding, unfortunately, somehow. Of course, we may have been cheated and simply bought iron slag from a high-temperature oven. But let's just assume that it would have been similar for the other laboratories. Then the slag is a typical sample, but somehow not meaningful. Perhaps you say now, well, this one line is not important after all. My goodness, there are already many lines. Is it really this important? Well, yes, unfortunately, it is important. Without this wretched line proving cesium-137, this yellow stroke here, no uranium fission. Without uranium fission, we have wild theories in respect to September 11th. Theories like cold fusion, antimatter, scalar weapons, Hutchinson effect, cavity inclusion ignition of deuterium and tritium, and also nanothermite. But now the main laws of physics say, hello, hello, hello. It was a nuclear process. It was a nuclear process. Momentum confirms it. Volume flow confirms it. Energy confirms it. And what does the subordinate radiation do? The subordinate radiation says, April Fools. This is maddening. For a physicist, this is completely upsetting. When a subordinated piece ridicules the highest physical principles, it's totally weird. How can that be? Which genius or which devil laughs at us? And the solution I would like to present here is shielding. Imagine you were standing next to a nuclear power plant. There is nuclear fission inside. But outside, you cannot measure an energy line of cesium-137 in a soil sample. Why is that so? Because a complicated technical control system uses cooling circuits to extract energy from the reactor, but the reactor itself remains encapsulated and closed. And now I introduce you to something else. Imagine you're James Bond. You're in a swimming pool, and you're armed with an underwater pistol. This underwater pistol has a range of approximately 10 meters. Your opponent, agent of a dark force, lurks treacherously underwater at a distance of 20 meters. He knows exactly that your underwater pistol is useless and is planning some devilish deeds. But you're James Bond. You know you're in a sort of jacuzzi, and you flip the right switch underwater, and then the water fills with air bubbles. And then you pull the trigger, and you kill the opponent unerringly, easily and unerringly. The James Bond trick is air bubbles reduce the density of the medium water, which then takes the bullet arrow much further. Here you see the layout. As a matter of fact, in atomic physics, it's a trick by Edward Teller. Edward Teller has the nickname father of the hydrogen bomb. It would be more precise to say master of neutron flux. Neutrons are small nuclear building blocks, shown here in the small box. The big blue sphere in the box represents an atom with its shell. The neutrons are these tiny particles. They are considered to be fast when they have a velocity of 20,000 kilometers per second, and they're considered to be slow when they have a velocity of, 2 kilometers per second. That's considered to be slow in the case of neutrons. Fast neutrons fly through the atoms of the solid bodies as they are scattered and are slowed down. By this loss of energy, by scattering, X-ray radiation is generated. However, after about 6 meters, they get stuck in solids. So after 6 meters, the neutron's range is over. In dry air, however, they can travel several kilometers. Some air molecules do not interfere very much as the density of the medium air is low. The solution for the 9/11 problem can be found in Edward Teller's conception of the Triga reactor. There, steam bubbles form, which suddenly ensure that a critical reactor calms down again. A trigger reactor cannot explode because very hot fuel allows the neutrons to escape. But the principle can also be reversed, and you can transform the reactor design from always non-critical to supercritical within hours. So in the new layout, we have a booster of boiling water, and boiling is important because of the steam bubbles, a protective shield of liquid boiling granite, and again, boiling is important because of the steam bubbles, and below, at the very bottom, the working reactor core enclosed in granite. When this reactor explodes, the water turns into an overpressure bubble. The liquid rock dilutes and encloses the radioactive reactor core. The explosion is relatively soft, and it's a kind of deflagration or nuclear fizzle. The picture shows the situation after 3 seconds. The mixture is still trapped in the granite. Due to the inclusion in the granite for several seconds, the extremely hot nuclear plasma can collect at the top before the eruption. Hot material will always rise to the top. The result is a kind of spearhead at 8,000 degrees Celsius. The 8,000 degrees Celsius is an estimate. The value from the literature is only 5,000 degrees Celsius and 200 bar for an equilibrium state that is not reached here. This picture shows the situation after 8 seconds after explosion. The mixture then breaks through the channel. And here's the situation after 10 seconds. The nuclear plasma has evaporated the inside of the tower. It follows the backlash of the pressure wave in the tower's top by the displaced air. You see the displaced air gathers in the tower's top, and when the pressure gets too high due to the still rising material from below, the air from above will punch out the plasma laterally. So we have the backlash from the displaced air in the tower's top, followed by the actual eruption of the overpressure bubble. After the eruption, and that is the important thing, the inside of the tower collapses and seals the shrinking hyperbaric chamber with a melt plug. This does not create a cavity, but the liquid stone melt, it sinks downwards. Only on the surface some depression will form. However, soil changes, cracks, crevices, and radioactive rock made it very difficult to rebuild. Here again for comparison, the destruction of the South Tower. Clearly visible in black is the vaporized building core, the condensed and solidified iron droplets, as well as in white the already discussed gas eruption. The information that 9/11 was based on a nuclear process is already more than 10 years old. Only the public refuses to believe the news. This is precisely the area of tension between physics and psychology mentioned at the beginning. We know it, but we refuse to believe. Military expert Dmitry Kalasov warned against radionuclides already 10 years ago, but he was laughed at. Instead, the code word toxins is generally used in the media to explain the cause of cancers in New York. The ground zero model is very similar to the Kalasov model, only the Kalasov model is explosive, while the ground zero model postulates a progressive, slow energy input. The question, which is now surely in the room, is why 150 kilotons of all things? For example, as shown here, 8 kilotons already cause a very large water stamp when they are fired in a lagoon. Here simple estimates have to be made of how much energy was absorbed by the granite, which evaporates at several thousand degrees, and how much water was available in the booster at 9/11. In fact, after the destruction of the North Tower, thick clouds of steam and dust were wafting in and over the city. Was the process really limited to a short gamma flash in the tower and to some water, and that's the end of the story? Well, certainly not. Further observations show no. there was actually a high energy input in the tower, and especially under the tower. The debris field remained hot for months and formed several heat zones. The energy richest zone was Hotspot A. Who makes the right guess? Hotspot A was under Building 7. Building 7 had the most energetic hotspot. And on February 12th, a heat source could still be detected in the granite soil, a signal which clearly stood out from the background. If you try to depict the facts of a sketch, it results in the following picture. We distinguish between an energy input of the first order, that's the sphere, the cause, and an energy input of the second order, the effect, such as the burn-up of the tower's top. To estimate the energy input, we simply ask which energy is necessary to create a 100-degree hot zone in the ground with a 75-meter spherical radius. The reason is clear. Within this zone, the water evaporates. As a short question, how much do I have to heat in order to create such a field with a cooling period of several months? With the help of the heat capacity of granite, you get the value of a total energy input of 1 times 10 to the 15 power joules. The energy unit joules can be converted into the energy unit kilotons, as for the weight, kilogram, and hundredweight. Only the number changes. And this joule value for the 3 spheres resulted in 150 kilotons per sphere, so the first approximate estimate is simple. Now, you always meet disbelief that such a radiation bomb could even exist. Is it possible to build such a thing? For this reason, I made a small model and brought it with me. It's made of wood. Here you can see the control rod, which consists of 2 parts. The yellow part symbolizes highly enriched uranium. The green part symbolizes the foreign metal thorium. Further, the discs also consist of thorium and enriched uranium. At first, while the bomb is inactive, the yellow uranium disc is not in contact with the highly enriched uranium part of the control rod. It's always next to the thorium rod, so that's the inactive bomb. You bring the thing to life by inserting the control rod into the device so that the uranium part of the control rod comes into contact with the uranium disc. Then the reactivity increases abruptly and the bomb is active. It will emit a short electromagnetic EMP pulse, which then fades away until the bomb reaches its stable work mode within a few seconds. This means that if the device was originally only warm due to the spontaneous fission of uranium, it now becomes very hot and melts. It then begins to boil, constantly mixes with the foreign metal, and melts into the granite. This is now well-established physics. This should be feasible, and yes, we can do it. So in the new design, you see the system immediately after activation, yet still just before the impact of the plane. At this point, the water booster cavern is still empty, which means the colleagues had to activate the bomb several seconds before the impact of the plane by inserting the control rod. The reactor then starts to work down here and begins to melt into the granite. Seconds later, the impact occurs and the fire extinguishing system starts flooding the water booster. Small explosive devices, conventional bombs, or even thermite connect the elevator shafts of the building to create a nuclear chimney. Here you can see the system in working mode, which will remain in a stable mode for about 1 hour and works as an X-ray beam generator. The now liquid metal mixture boils at 4,000 degrees centigrade and melts into the granite. The formation of vapor bubbles in the granite and in the water ensures permeability, and focused X-rays from the channel reach the top of the tower. Note that the beam widens only in the tower's top, not in the lobby where the first responders were positioned. This X-ray radiation causes the top of the tower to become very hot and to melt partially. Individual pulses of neutron radiation shoot through the tower and are registered from a distance of 7 kilometers by the helicopter cameras. This happens, for example, when steam bubbles rupture the liquid slag of the granite. Naturally, a steam cushion forms between the liquid granite with its slag on top and the liquid water. The liquids are not in direct contact. Now please watch the current video. Here you can see the recordings from the helicopter and the corresponding particle interference patterns. Now we see film from a different helicopter, but the camera shows the same interference patterns. This is the melting top of the tower. The steel just flows out. Then you will see the rising steam swaths from the water booster, which is boiling all the time. Here the eruption starts, the weakened top sinks down, the south tower falls. And during this collapse in front of the falling material, there were also upshooting steam eruptions directly out of the ground. Obviously, through a side channel, a pressure release took place in the city streets. Here, I briefly explain the ignition of the reactor. It's tricky physics, but who bothers? Never mind. Above the system is under control. Fast neutrons escape, uranium and thorium are continuously mixed and boil, the bubbling mush slowly sinks into the granite, Granite melts at 1500 degrees Celsius, and if the metal mush boils at 4000 degrees Celsius, it will sink down neatly. While doing so, the liquid granite acts in addition as a circulating coolant. This will work for about an hour. Below you can see why the system becomes supercritical. First, a neutron reflector made of liquid beryllium can form on the top of the slag, with beryllium present, of course. Secondly, a certain depth, the pressure becomes so high that the mixture stops boiling. Thus, the phase separation of uranium and thorium starts due to the different density of the two substances. As a result, slow neutrons, which were scattered back by the reflector, meet pure uranium, and this combination goes sour. The system explodes or deflagrates. The soft explosion causes only a faint quake. Nevertheless, an intensive gamma and X-ray portion is released, which penetrates the tower as a radiation cone, and accordingly escapes attenuated also to the outside. Both radiation cones lead to different effects in cameras and large metal objects. Please start following the video, the current video. Here you can see the analysis of the soundtrack, which shows first a long maximum, then a valley, and then two shorts. These signals can be assigned to the ignition, the long maxima, the inclusion in granite, the valley, the breakthrough from the ground with the first peak, as well as the impact in the tower's top, which is the second peak. So please play the first video. It's not really exciting. The video shows the image failure of the camera. You see the recording made by the helicopter camera. Here is ignition. Now the pressure chamber forms, the plasma rises. This is the breakthrough, and now the plasma hits the top, and the tower falls down in its own eruption. Also, you've seen the short flash in the top. With this picture, I would like to show a serious analytical error in the 9/11 research. Often the observed destruction of the individual floors is pointed out, and this is interpreted at the same time as the proposed synchronously controlled ignition of hundreds of explosive charges. The videos are ambiguous. The eyewitness report with karate chops starting from high up moving downwards from their observations. In fact, these are not explosive charges that were detonated from top to bottom. Rather, it is the structural failure of the individual outer steel segments. These resist the growing internal pressure per floor for about 1/10 of a second and are then torn apart segment by segment. And please watch the following video.
Floor by floor, instead of popping out.
It was like as if they had detonated.
Yeah,
as if they were
detonated.
planned to take down a building. Boom, 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 boom.
All the way down. I was watching it and running.
All of a sudden, it was like bang, 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 like bullet shots.
I saw from the corner, boom, 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 boom.
And always black iron dust above, white steam from below. Very logical. Of course, around each radiation bomb, there is also a corresponding external sphere of action. This is revealed by the fact that in this sphere of activity, radios fail, cameras flicker, and large metal surfaces catch fire through the induction of eddy currents. The spheres of action can overlap a very strong superimposition zone, resulted purely geometrically for Building 5. Now let's have a look at Building 5. The picture was taken from Church Street around 1 p.m. and shows the highly burning Building 4 on the left, as well as the clearly burning Building 5 on the right. This picture shows Building 5 behind St. Paul's Chapel, clearly in flames. Here we have Building 5 seen from the west, and here again, Building 5, and everyone can see this is not a harmless office fire. Building 7 could not have a gas eruption because the fire protection system was switched into test mode at 6:30 a.m. early in the morning. This meant that there was no water ingress into the building and therefore no flooding of the shaft. According to the Ground Zero model, Building 7 was destroyed by a reactor bomb without water booster. Due to the rapid rusting process and small auxiliary explosions, it turned into a small pile of rust. Particularly striking in this photo are the still intact granite slabs that lay like a blanket over the destroyed building. This is also easy to explain. The cross-section is the probability of elements interacting with gamma or neutron rays. This probability is 21 times higher for iron than for silicon, of which the granite consists. In other words, the iron is strongly attacked by the radiation as becoming brittle, while the granite is not. Paper also has a low cross-section of interaction. It cannot absorb the radiation energy. The cubic space-centered iron crystal, with its free electron bands on the other hand, absorbs the hard radiation, blocks it, and breaks at the molecular level. The iron becomes brittle or even breaks down into dust. Furthermore, I received important information from the isotope laboratory that the Geiger counter should not be trusted, especially with low radiation values. Even if the dust from the measured values was only slightly radioactive, the solidified metal droplets can contain harmful amounts of radioactive substances. In the case of beta emitters, such as strontium-90, only the decay of the atoms on the dust's surface leads to a signal. However, the radiation is still present inside. It becomes effective when the metal lattice is dissolved by acid. It's also dissolved after ingestion by stomach acid or after inhalation by salty body fluids. When these radioisotopes are absorbed by the body, for example for bone formation, they damage specifically the hematopoietic system and can cause cancer even in small doses. It's highly likely that this is also the cause of Marcy Border's death, whose photograph became famous as the Dust Lady. She was captured at 9/11 by the dust cloud and died in 2015 of stomach cancer. So the cancer developed exactly where the radioisotopes were dissolved and released, in her stomach. As many other victims, Marcy Border also died heavily indebted. And all of you know, cancer is big business for some. The actual dust flow can be seen in the graph shown here. Of course, asbestos fibers and toxins, mainly the acrid poisonous fumes, do have an effect, but as well in addition, so do the radionuclides. The event exposed 500,000 people, and at present about 10% or 50,000 people suffer from a 9/11 disease, a so-called 9/11 condition. It is now up to the Americans to verify this model. Because certain radionuclides must be present in the soil samples when drilling deep enough. Ladies and gentlemen, as long as these radioisotopes are not proven, this lecture can be mocked as a new crazy thesis, saying that the World Trade Center has been destroyed by water. But don't be afraid of ridicule. We can tell the Americans that they must not trust the Geiger counter, but that the isotopes must be searched and detected by an isotope laboratory, which requires digging. We must also not be afraid to read a nuclear process modeled by the free, or maybe I should say the to-be-liberated universities. The approaches presented here are useful and technically not wrong. Nevertheless, every faculty member and every university professor currently risks his or her position if he or she wants to work on or represent such a modeling. According to my calculations, I get a relatively high load on the rock based on a 150 kiloton energy input and a pure uranium fission process. For the strontium-90 alone, this is about 790 kilobecquerels per kilogram of rock, and I sincerely hope my calculations or assumptions are wrong. But maybe at some point the technical universities will be interested in this model. It is certainly demanding in its entirety, and the solution is necessary. At the very least, a calculation must not be made ridiculous. Here, for example, you can see a snapshot of the effect of the air cushion that's causing the backlash of the shooting plasma, and also the evaporation of the inner building core. Let's play the next video. Here you can see the top view of the World Trade Center site from above. We are now inside our cube of 1 kilometer edge length. We can rotate the cube to look at the situation from a different angle. As I've said, our model is inside the cube, and we can also go underground and have a look at the melt funnel. All these calculations should be made by the universities and not by a private person. Now, I'm not quite finished yet. In summary, yes, so much for the physical aspects of the ground zero model. In summary, one could say, yes, the psychopaths of power are without regard for all people. And yes, radioactivity can be hidden to a certain extent. These are again the two poles, psychological and physical. In the context of the work, the question is, how can the possibility of such crimes as 9/11 rise at all in a healthy people's body? The answer I would like to give you to this question is sobering. In a healthy people's body, such a crime cannot arise. It is certainly not possible for the perpetrators to mock the victims afterwards. This is not possible in a healthy people's body. This situation, too, can be modeled in order to better understand it. I come to the conclusion that the body of the people must also be ill if such crimes are to arise at all. The comparison from medicine shows here a tumor as an indicator of a completely different burden. What I actually want to say with this diagram is the following. If we succeed in seeing the crimes around 9/11 as an indicator for a completely different disease, then we have gained a lot. We can then search for the actual cause. Then it is indeed the merit of the group around Zelikow and Zakheim to have ignited a bright warning light by participating in this crime, a light that points to the existence of another illness or an additional poison. You can call this systemic poison whatever you want. Human greed, hunger for power, dominance and hierarchical thinking. You can even assign a certain intelligence delta to this position. For a mathematical model, you can add many components here. But above all, I would like to say it makes no sense to simply want to punish the perpetrators. Of course, these people are responsible for their actions, but we also have to try to know the superior causes to at least mitigate them, and humor is a means to this end. Okay, so very positive. We are slowly recognizing the scale of fraud, but not all people will be able to take these things with humor. Nevertheless, I took the liberty of creating a small collection of curiosities at the end. We are ridiculed by the psychopaths, but we can also shake our heads and laugh about the psychopaths. The delusion is partly really ridiculous. I am now showing 4 pictures in quick succession, all of which are connected somewhere. Picture 1, you see an energy input of 23 kilotons in a lagoon. The large wall of fog is very short condensation phenomena. Picture 2, you see the cake of the graduation ceremony of this test in the Officers Club in Washington. Picture 3, you see the situation after the dissolution of the condensation cloud. It's the same test. Picture 4, you see an original fountain at the World Trade Center. At least this fountain has disturbing resemblance to the cake. The situation becomes absurd when you know that an underwater atomic bomb has also been detonated at this exact spot, or, from the 1970 perspective, will be detonated, eventually. The situation becomes even more absurd when you understand that before 9/11, dolls or dummies were set up in the buildings. Namely for the art project Cowardly Men Have Done It or Gutless Men Carried It Out. This is a play on words cast in form. The dolls had a square hole in their belly and carry out a coffin-like object. Gutless in English means bellyless or cowardly. So you can continue the game. The next 4 pictures have at least what is called a little taste in Swabian. A bland aftertaste maybe, sometimes even the smell of a little sulfur. In picture 1, you see the double play of the blue reactor lights and the tribute in light, both Chernobyl radiation. Picture 2, you see the double play of the radiation shields with eruption opening in case of the Twin Towers and the reflecting memorial pools as they are named officially. And for Building 7, the pool is without eruption opening, but it's very nice, designed as a shield or as a radiation shield. In short, 3 towers, 3 radiation shields. Picture 3, you see the double play between the Peace Dove and the Eye of Knowledge. This building was first presented as Paloma. The subway station Oculus opens on every anniversary of September 11th and looks up into the sky for about 2 hours. Picture 4, you see the double play between a place of relaxation and a gesture of submission to the Oculus station. You are lying on the floor in front of something. Of course, this double play is only visible from a very special and rather crazy angle. As I said before, some people have difficulties with physics, some people with information about the perpetrator group. But in the end, a model is a model, and we are allowed to play with it. Nevertheless, with the Ground Zero model, we have also achieved a new level of knowledge. Maybe the model is wrong, but I hope that we can uncover the lie completely soon. This is now the second to last page. I've selected the photo of a hike in the German mountain range, Ammergebirge. The picture shows water calmly flowing in a natural environment. It is a healthy environment that has nothing to do with destruction or the man-made moving of mountains. And this is the harmony we should seek. So stay focused on life, stay positive, and stay open-minded. I close this lecture with a quote from Thomas Jefferson because the healing knowledge is already there, here with us. Only the truth content is yet recognized. It's outside. Thomas Jefferson said, "Educate and inform the whole mass of people. They are the only sure reliance for the preservation of our liberty." Thank you very much for listening.